Eight, and the official rebirth of the nation of Israel.
1948.
Multiple presidents, nearly all of them since that point, have attempted to initiate some type of a framework for peace in the Middle East. And most all have involved land for peace. You've heard that phrase, meaning they've had as a part of it the requirement for peace that Israel agrees to the creation of a two-state solution, they would call it, two-state plan. Actually, by having to give up land promised to Israel by God and give it to the Palestinians, to whom God did not promise land. And thus far, all plans have failed. The most current framework for peace is probably the Abrahamic Accord drafted by Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, as we remember. The framework for this plan moved earlier this year into an adopted position where Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Israel agreed in theory to that agreement. And I'm going to put it in legislative terms. It now sits on the table for future consideration at the United Nations. It was put there for a vote, and they chose not to vote on it. That was not all that long ago. But thus far, no peace plan has been achievable by political brokering. The question is peace achievable, however, by war? It's a different thing. Well, the key is, what does God say about that? So, Bill, here we go. What I just referenced there is what you referred to in the last segment about the current peace plan that some of Israel's neighbors were involved in. And so anyways, that one's kind of sitting on the table, more or less, as I put, at the United Nations. At some point, we know, biblically, there will be a peace deal in Israel. We know that, actually, we don't know how long that peace treaty will exist. We do, but there's some things about that because Israel, we're told, has to live, they'll have to be secure and be without walls, and that certainly is not there. So I'm going to throw it out there, go where you want. The question is how and when does this peace come about that the Bible speaks, and lay out, if you could, the chronology of our now to the time of what the Bible says about peace. So take and build this out as you will.
The biblical and prophetic perspective to what you just asked. First of all, I do feel the need to apologize for speaking so fast and so long in that last segment, but it's hard to unpack all the Middle East impacting, globally impacting events that Bibi Netanyahu is going to have to face now at this point in time on the end times line. Okay. So please accept my apologies on that. I tend to speak quick when I've got so much to say. But with respect to the Arab, the Abraham Accords peace plan, basically all that really was a two-state solution. Even those countries, UAE and Bahrain, etc., the underlying motivations were to have a two-state solution, and that's what Joe Biden wants, and that's what some in Israel want. But Bibi Netanyahu is opposed to that. He was opposed to that, and he will still be opposed to that. Matter of fact, when the Hashemite Kingdom of Palestine plan got forwarded and got in the front press in June of this year, Joe Biden immediately rejected it because he wants a two-state solution. But the comment you made, which is really telling and poignant, is that peace is not always established through politically brokered deals, especially in this case, land for peace deals, two-state solutions. That's failed miserably throughout the past presidential, Bush, Clinton, Obama, etc. But sometimes peace is achieved militarily. When you take out your enemies, you can then live at peace. And the reason it's important to keep an eye on what's about to happen in the Temple Mount right now, the status quo is probably going to be a change here. We're speculating, but it's probably going to be changed here, and probably relatively soon. And we know that has to happen because ultimately there's going to be a third Jewish temple built there, so that means that definitely will change the status quo. And I think when this starts to happen, you're going to have some prophecies start to find fulfillment, and this could happen into the next year, 2023. One of the prophecies that we need to look at is in Jeremiah and Zechariah 12. Verse 2, it says, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling," or in some translations, dizziness or intoxication, unto all the people around about when they siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. If you strip control of the Temple Mount away from the Muslims, they will try to lay siege on it because it's the third holiest site in Islam. And I think we're going to see that in that direction. And what happens, it says later on in Zechariah, it says, here's how this will be resolved, and it's militarily. Zechariah 12:6 says, in that day, and that's the day.
Do you hear what he said here? He said it's going to start happening in 2023. This guy's like a Jewish Christian. He really knows what he's talking about, and he says all these things are coming so fast. But I'll tell you, the average American has no idea what's about to happen.
A war between the Arabs and the Jews that sort of gets sparked and catalyzed by this push for seizing Judah and Jerusalem and trying to maintain control, I believe, of the Temple Mount.
You see, we are not on man's timeline. We are on God's timeline. And man just keeps going about shopping and pleasures and buying things. But God has a timeline, and something's going to happen in 2023.
No choice, because the Arabs are going to, they're going to confederate. We talked about this in Psalm 83 and elsewhere. They're going to want to wipe Israel off the map. They're going to want to take the promised land. This has been their goal ever since Israel became a nation. This was their goal in 1948, the war in 1967, and also in 1973, the Yom Kippur War. So, I mean, you know, time permitting, Sam, we can get in a little deeper military activity to happen, and a strike against Iran more than likely in 2023, more than likely. Israel can't wait any longer.
They just said that he believes next year sometime Israel will strike and start a war with Iran.
It becomes a whole different environment over there, and I think God's got Bibi Netanyahu in his religious right and position now to handle that war. They'll fight it and they'll win it, and that's what the prophecies talk about.
And that will start a major prophecy in the Bible.
Programs, you've also alluded to it, but I think you've said that it really holds the key to this potential war that might be triggered by some of the warnings of Israel's neighbors and the election of Netanyahu. Would you just talk about that for?
Netanyahu was just reelected after being thrown out of office. I find that very ironic that he was reelected all over again.
Those who didn't listen to the former programs are not familiar with it. It talks about an Arab confederacy of those people on the right hand and the left hand that surround Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the Palestinians, the Hamas, Jordan, Egypt, we believe is in there as well. That are going to confederate and come together with a devious plan to wipe the nation of Israel off the map, that the name of Israel will be remembered no more. And the psalm goes on to talk about how militarily the writer Asaph, who is a prophet, he says, deal with them, militarily. If you read
it could be the prerequisite, the beginning of the war of Ezekiel to come shortly after.
Nation. He had a plan for peace in the Middle East when he would promise to bring the Jews back from the land, which was fulfillment of prophecy in 1948, numerous prophecies. And he said in Jeremiah chapter 12, verses 14 and 15, the Lord says, against my evil neighbors, which is interesting, who touch the inheritance which I have caused my people Israel to inherit, behold, I will pluck them out of their land and pluck out the house of Judah from among them. So he's going to pull out the Arabs that were living in it's going to be Israel, and he's going to pull out the Jews that were living in 6 of it was Jordan, 1946. God was moving around. He was sovereignly into the land and having compassion on them. But he goes on to say, and this is the pivotal part of where we're going now, but it shall be if they learn carefully the ways of my people to swear by my name, not Allah, but Jehovah, as the Lord lives, as they taught my people to swear by Baal. Back in Jeremiah's time, they were they were sacrificing their children to the false god Baal. In other words, there was a really bad time where they were worshiping Baal. Then they shall be established in the midst of my people. But if they do not obey, which they're not obeying, they're out of compliance, I will utterly pluck up and destroy that nation. So the point being is that God had a plan. He moved the Arab states into positions. He put the Arabs back into those states. And all he asked in return for that great sovereign activity of having compassion on everybody was that they would worship him. and they're not. They're worshiping all. They're trying to take the Holy Land. They want to wipe Israel off the map, according to Psalm 83. Iran wants to wipe Israel off the map. You know, at some point, God's going to say, I'm done. I'm over. I'm going to move forward. And when you start seeing those prophecies happening where God is moving forward through the Israeli Defense Forces, he's executing his fury and his vengeance. So our long-suffering God has been very patient up to this point. But the prophecies are going to find fulfillment. And I think what I'm watching real closely now is that are we about at that point now where God is going to say, okay, now it's time. I've given the opportunity, ample time, war after war. There's no two-state solution going to happen.
You see, this is about God's timing and Israel. This has been going on since the beginning of the Old Testament. This is about Israel. It's not about Russia, United States, Ukraine. There's many countries will be involved, but God's people are Israeli. Those are his people. He chose them. Now, not all of them will be saved. They still have to be saved by Jesus Christ, since Jesus Christ and the cross. What this man is talking about is all the nations are rising up against Israel now. And Israel, maybe in 2023, later on in the year, is going to strike against Iran and take out its nuclear capabilities, because Israel isn't like South Korea and North Korea. South Korea, you know, they'll fool around for 20, 30, 40 years. Jewish people aren't like that. They don't fool around. They will go in and take you out in a weekend because they truly believe they have God on their side. They have no fear when it comes to these things. It's hard to understand in our modern world because we're dealing with Old Testament people with modern day weapons. We're dealing with Old Testament belief systems with modern day, you know, jets, warships, missiles. So if they go in next year and take that out in Iran, it will start a regional war. And I will just say this, I don't know if it's going to lead to the War of Ezekiel or if it will be the start of the War of Ezekiel. Maybe Russia will then come to the defense of Iran immediately and start the War of Ezekiel. However, I can tell you this, if this happens next year in 2023, just like this guy believes, he's one of the experts over there in Jerusalem. And he's a Christian, and he looks at the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, from a Christian, Jesus Christ, God in the flesh point of view. If this happens, you will see a worldwide stock market crash. You will see something happen that the whole world will immediately shut down and stop. Get all freaked out. It'll make the pandemic, the 2-year pandemic, look small. Because God has been warning us. 9/11, he warned us. The Great Recession, he warns us. All these things, he warns us. The pandemic, he warns us. Nobody listens. Nobody changes. Nobody stocks up food. Nobody has a secure water supply. So I will end with this. If this happens next year, what do you think is going to happen to the economy? What do you think is going to happen to the worldwide system for at least 6 months? I'll tell you what, you'll run out of food, I guarantee, in 3 days. Now, I want you, whoever listens to this video, I want you to then go look at how many views this video got, and I'll prove my point that nobody is listening. This video probably it'll get way less than 50 hits. And that's what I mean. It's coming like a freight train, but Americans aren't listening. They never listen. They're not listening. They have no idea what could possibly happen next year.